after with product and price and place and promotion and positioning, and it never stopped like providing insights. So it really did live up to those expectations, I think, in some way.
It really did. I mean, I was kind of having a little fun, but I can remember just snippets of things that really mattered to me. I'll give you just one really simple one. Everybody at Procter & Gamble had to learn a little bit about writing a memo / doing a TV commercial, because it turns out that a short memo and a TV commercial are not all that different the way they're structured. It goes like this: summarize the situation, state the idea, explain how it works, reinforce key benefits, suggest an easy next step. I mean, what it looks like is, Mommy, I broke my arm. We got to leave the chicken in the oil. Here's the answer. Crisco oil. Why? Because it has special chemicals in it. Not to be facetious. It has special stuff in it that keeps the chicken drier. This is great chicken, Mom. Package stuff. And it turns out you can write a memo the same way. Here's the situation. What's the idea? How are we going to pursue it? You have to explain how that works, reinforce why it's going to be a good idea, and then sketch out next steps. But it's a really pithy way to nail down any argument. I remember that for the rest of my life. It has shaped the way I write. It shapes the way I think. It shapes the way I think about marketing, sales, presentation. So yeah. I'm very nervous about this whole thing, right? I buy a basketball team. Who the hell knows anything about how to own a basketball team until you have bought a basketball team? And this is going to be kind of my first sojourn. I've met a couple of the players, but we get, I don't know how many fans we probably had, 670,000 for a fan rally down at Staples Center. And I had to try to be pithy. I had to try to explain why I was so excited. I had to try to explain, what are we going to make of this team? You got to remember, the Clippers have been the sad story of basketball for time immemorial. I mean, going back to their founding in Buffalo in the 70s, became the Clippers in 79 in San Diego. A laughing stock. I think the worst record for years of any team in major professional sports. So how do I say things are going to be different? I am different than the old owner, but people have this legend of the same old Clippers. So we do this fan rally. We come out. I come out with some of our key players, our coach, and I just talk about how we're going to be hardcore. There's one thing we're going to stand for. We're going to be hardcore. We're just going to drive. We're going to keep coming. If somebody knocks us down, we're going to learn how to get better. And, you got to stake a position, just like you do on Heinz Brownie mix. You have to say what's going to be unique, what's going to be differentiated. Now, can you say everybody else can say the same story? Sure, about their team. But we claim it. We try to live it, breathe it, sleep it. And mostly it's the players and the coaches who have to bring this stuff to life, but we get to put in the people who can bring that kind of a culture to life.
Steve, I mean, you have been in this incredibly unique situation in terms of running one of the most powerful, visible companies in the world, and then, taking over and really revitalizing, an iconic NBA team. What surprised you, because you've always been a fan, I know that, but like you said, you had only owned a team before. What surprised you about taking over the team and the business of the NBA?
Business of the NBA. The business of the NBA thing probably was the business side. Both the revenue and the expense. You can say, how is that possible? Well, you work in the software tech business. You essentially have an in-software supply of product, particularly software in the old days, but to some extent also internet services today. And with basketball, that's something that happens. You have an exhaustible supply of tickets that disappear at the end of each game. And if you didn't sell one, you never get any revenue. How do you think about that problem? From sponsorship, a whole different set of issues there, which I think is still a little bit of black magic for me. Big licensure of intellectual property. I have no idea, how to value TV rights. At this day and age, you got to ask yourself the question: are you going to take the game over the internet, or are you going to continue to put it in on local broadcast? We have to think that kind of thing through, and we continue to think it through. So the business was more complicated. But the cool thing was I learned so much. I've learned so much owning the Clippers that would have made me a better CEO of Microsoft than I ever could have imagined. And that's not the business side, man. That's the basketball side.
Wow. Could you give us an example? That's so fascinating. Could you give us an example?
Okay. In business, what's the thing a lot of business will say? They'll say, "Oh yeah, we're accountable. We're results focused. Mm-hmm. We're all about our outcomes. We're about our revenues. There's a lot of accountability, responsibility, performance. We perform, measure our performance. Well, businesses, you come out with your results once a quarter. Then you'll say, "Oh, they were great or they were bad, but they're not going to be as good next quarter. But don't worry, we got all this shit in the lab and you can't see it, but it's going to be great." No, that's not how it works in basketball. Boom, every game, you won, you lost. It's completely accountable. It's gone. You can't ever recover it. You can't say, "I'll make it back up in sales next quarter." Every 24 seconds, actually, what you won and lost. You won or lost. 24 seconds. Did you score a basket? Did the other guy score a basket? No. Boom, flip, boom, boom. People talk about accountability and transparency in business. Well, I don't know anything about the Los Angeles Clippers that you can't know. You can watch our team. You can read all the statistics. You can pull all the video footage. You can read about all the matchups. You can watch the players. I mean, there really isn't much I know that you can't know if you want to. And that kind of transparency and performance and accountability, teamwork gets a lot of talk in business, but you can see teamwork. You can see how people have to come together. There's no time for random crap. You really have to be together on the team, on the floor, and everybody can see it if you're not. So I would say those were good lessons for me. It worked the other way around, though, too. There were things that I learned in software development that apply very well to basketball as well.
Which I think is kind of interesting. Well, that is amazing. That is so fascinating. I have my Twitter blowing up of people just loving what you just said. To put it mildly, you are a very visible, supportive owner. I've lost count of the number of times that the camera has caught you, cheering on and doing something, really supporting the team. But I think you also been really hands off when it comes to in terms of how you approach ownership. I'm just curious to hear about how you think about managing the team and the role of an owner, because you obviously done a fantastic job. You're known as being hands off, though you kind of dove in particular times. Some other owners haven't been. So how do you approach managing the team?
Well, you know who taught me how to manage this team, don't you? He's on this very, very Clubhouse. That would be Steven Sadowski.
Yeah,
basketball, not the sport for short Jewish people not going to medical school.
No, I want to actually tell you that, you asked about management. Okay, I managed groups. I managed Microsoft. We had engineering teams. We had business teams. At the Clippers, we have engineering teams and we have business teams. The engineering function is essentially our product development effort, which is the guys who put together our roster. The engineers are kind of like our players. It's about that kind of delegation that we move forward. I give input. Don't think I don't give any input on the basketball side. But I don't say, hey, we should do this. I'll ask questions. What about this? Is this working? Did you guys ever think about this? How much of it matters? Well, some of it probably does, some doesn't. And the truly big decisions, of course, I have to sign off on. It's not like we're going to deal half of our draft picks for the next century in order to pick up Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. People aren't going to do that without checking in. It'd be kind of like saying, let's go invest billions of dollars in Xbox without checking it off with the CEO. It just doesn't happen. But there is a lot to be learned. Now, Stephen will know on the business side of Microsoft, I was probably a lot more micromanaging, and I still have a little bit of that characteristic. I'll confess on the business side of the Clippers.
And this is so fascinating. Putting this team aside, what the thing that is just so interesting is you're really a super fan of basketball. You used to get up at like 4 a.m. and go play basketball with a bunch of Microsoft people every couple of days. And
I saw Steve at the pro club all the time playing basketball early in the morning.
Made it feel so bad because you had time to go work out and play, and we just didn't have any excuse there. It just made us feel so
But
bad.
it's interesting because I didn't grow up. My dad didn't know anything. My mom didn't know anything about basketball. My dad was an immigrant in Switzerland. No basketball. My mother didn't grow up with it. And so I really had no visibility until I was about 11. My family moved to Europe for 3 years between the time I was 8 and 11. We came home from Europe, and the neighbor boys down the street were into basketball. And I just kind of fell in love. You wanted to relax when I was in school, middle school, high school. What did we do? We'd go out in the driveway and shoot baskets. We'd go over to the junior high nearby and we'd shoot baskets in the parking lot. And I never was a good basketball player. I only played 1 year ever organized, and that was sort of a team you couldn't get cut from. But I just sort of fell in love with it. When I got to college, I was a statistician for the basketball team, and just as I became an adult, stayed a total fan. First of the Detroit Pistons during the bad boy era, when the Pistons finally won a championship. Then the Seattle Supersonics, which was a lot of fun here in town. And of course, now I've abandoned them all for your LA Clippers.
Okay, I want to. We're going to talk about Sonics in Seattle, I think, in just a bit. But I want to talk about talent because in the Clippers, I think you kind of talked about this. You've had to make some really hard decisions with talent. Letting some people go, trading people away, and then you also been a part of some really high intensity, high pressure deal making. Especially the one you mentioned, like bringing Kawhi and PG to the Clippers. Just talk to us about what was it to be on the inside of that, and how does it compare to any one of your iconic deals at Microsoft?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, to win a championship in the NBA, you have to have the elite of the elite talent. You can't just have a bunch of good talent. You have to have, I'd say one of the few best players in the world, realistically, if you're going to have a chance at the championship. And we had an opportunity. We made a presentation to Kawhi Leonard. We really wanted him to come join us. He is one of those elite players. And he said, look, I want to come. I might want to come, but if I'm going to come, I want to make sure that we put ourselves in a position to win a championship. And, we talked to him about other guys who would complement him well. And then we said, look, our concept here has to be to try to not only recruit Kawhi, but to trade for Paul George. And, now we have two of the top players in the world play for the Clippers, and we give ourselves a shot. It doesn't give you a championship, but at least we're in a position where we have a real shot. And, I think everybody will say that in their business. You've got to have the best of the best. Actually, basketball, sports, you actually know who the best of the best in the world is. It's unambiguous. Engineering, everybody's got the best talent. In basketball, everybody can look, see, and evaluate. And we put ourselves in a position. And now we've got to keep getting better as a team. We've got to peak at the right time. We've got to stay healthy to give ourselves, every opportunity to do what we want to do.
But by the way, I always I'm always amused by, imagining you talking to Kawhi. Kawhi is not exactly the most vocal demonstrative of people, and you are mildly, you are one. So I'm always kind of amused by imagining your interactions. Okay, so to get to a kind of a more interesting topic, or sort of more tricky one, there's been obviously so much conversation about student athletes and compensation. There's been a long, drawn discussion across multiple sports. Now, you are obviously in a position of an owner and you're one of the people running one of the iconic things. What are your thoughts on student athletes and compensation?
Well, I think it's a really.
This is going to make headlines.
I think it's really complicated. Well, let me try to frame the issues. Okay, I'm just going to try to frame the issues. On most college campuses, either zero sports make money, one sport makes money, or two sports make money. That's it. So if you were to think about it like a business, there's really no basis on which you could pay people to play sports unless they play one of those 0, 1, or 2 sports. What are those 2 sports? Men's football. Men's football is a sport that a number of schools can actually make a lot of money. And in fact, at a lot of schools, men's football pays for the rest of the athletic department. It pays for every other sport. And athletic departments can basically sustain themselves on the profits for men's football. Men's basketball, most places, most bigger schools is break even, maybe makes a little bit of money, and everything else is just a cost. So then you have to say, okay, who are you going to pay? Are you only going to pay people in the sports that make money? If you pay them, is that going to starve out the rest of the sports that are there? If you started to agree you can pay them, well, then the difference between staying in college and going pro younger becomes a big deal. In football, it probably helps kids to stay in college just to mature physically before they go play a pro sport. If you said to me, hey, Steve, take a stand. What do you want to have happen here? I think that probably the right thing to have happen is for college athletes to only get compensated in the sense that they get scholarships and room and board and good academic support, but also enable the kids, if they want to be able to play professional sports earlier in their lives. I think that makes sense. You can in hockey, you can in baseball. Basketball is kind of a weird one. You need 1 year essentially of college or 1 year of doing something out of high school before you can turn pro. Football's got its own set of requirements. But that probably would be the approach I would take. Look, if you think about it, a year of well-supported activity academically and athletically at one of these schools, that's $100,000 a year. That is a form of compensation at the end of the day.
Right. That makes sense. And I think switching gears just a little bit, still about NBA, but talk about technology. This is something that I know that you have a lot of interest on in expanding, how we use tech to improve the fan experience. The fan experience itself hasn't quite changed a lot, from where we are. We sit in our living room, we consume, and also people who are sitting there in the stadium. What do you want to do there? What are some new technologies or, scenarios that you want to see be there, will be in place? And what are you envisioning there as far as the tech investment that's needed there?
Okay, I'll give you two things to think about. First, look, the old broadcast has just not changed much in forever. Still, the number one view of a basketball court is one camera going side to side, right, at midcourt. Right now, you can add cameras. The NBA playoffs, everybody was happy. We added a bunch of cameras. You get different camera angles. That's nice. That's good. There's been some augmented reality in sports. What's the most famous augmented reality concept everybody in America is familiar with? It's the fake first down marker on a football field. Yes, it's not like those bright yellow lines. That's a form of augmented reality in a sense. So the question is, how do we transform the viewing experience using either augmented reality or synthetic reality? How do we, in real time, help you be able to see what the point guard sees? Can we synthesize the view as if we are really one of the players on the floor? Can we show you real-time probabilities of things happening, success, failure? Can we integrate gaming/gambling into the experience in a real-time way where you can use this sort of augmented broadcast form to improve the experience? So that viewing, gaming, interactivity experience, we need to both augment. We have a product out right now in sort of limited in a beta test form that we call Clippers Court Vision. I encourage you to take a look at it. It's really quite a good piece of work. It was done by a startup called Second Spectrum out of LA. I mean, it's a funny kind of company. The two founders were computer science professors in vision and computer recognition at USC, but they're both basketball nuts. They actually have hired the last 5 of the last 6 or 6 out of the last 7 basketball captains out of MIT. Starting in machine learning at 6'11". I mean, but so they've really, we've worked with them, but they've really done a job to rethink that experience. And I think the possibilities there are really interesting and limitless. And, we're sort of at a version 0.8, if you will, but I just see so much opportunity. I'll flip it around now and say, what about in an arena? I think in arena, there's a lot of opportunities also to innovate with technology in the experience. If you just think about all the things that are a pain in the neck inside an arena, you got to get to the bathroom. You got to know where to go. It's got to be free. You've got to get your food. How do you automate? How do you simplify? How do you use technology to improve those experiences? A lot of people say, "Oh, don't you want to have screens and seats and phones and better stuff?" I don't want anybody ever looking at their phone ever at one of our games. Never. I want them looking at the floor. I want them applauding and cheering, not with their heads down in a phone. So how do you use new screen technologies and video technologies to make it so people can have what we call a heads up interaction with the game as opposed to a heads down interaction with the game? There's technology, I think, that will help with that. We're building a new arena. So we're right now in the process of really speccing out what kinds of things can transform that in-building experience in cool ways as well.
By the way, Steve, actually, a Second Spectrum CEO, Rajiv, is actually one of the listeners here. I'm a big fan. I think they're amazing. Okay, here's a question for you. Last year was obviously is there...
And also an old professor of his that I know is here too. So
nice.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
Steve, the popularity for this Clubhouse is off the charts. Okay, so I want to think on the technology point. Last year's, starting from March, whenever the Jazz game was halted, was one bizarre surreal season. And from the outside, it seemed like the bubble kind of let the league experiment or at least force them to innovate in ways they may not have innovated in the past. How was kind of living through the bubble, and do you think like that led to innovation which we might see once the pandemic ends?
Yeah, it did bring a lot of opportunity because you had a very controlled environment for the game, which meant you could control it. You could control it for the broadcast. You had no fans sitting there. You could put camera technology of any kind wherever you wanted to in the building, even in the ceilings. It turns out the second spectrum stuff depends heavily on having cameras in the ceiling so they can watch the game and then machine learn about what's going on in the game. But there were a lot of things that were pioneered, not all of which can be done back in stadiums. You can't have cameras sliding back and forth along the court, otherwise you'd bought courtside seat holders. But there were ideas pioneered. It was good for figuring that out, and I think that was good. I also think, frankly speaking, really understanding testing and what it takes to keep people healthy. We, the NBA, participated in a test with Yale and doing saliva testing for COVID. So I think there were a lot of good. People stayed healthy, and I think it provided a nice bounce in terms of something exciting last summer and fall.
Yeah, that was really nice to see. I think we all watched it was one of those first large scale events we saw through the pandemic, and it was just great to see how well it was just put together, and it just gave us hope that you could do this across like other sports and be able to like scale this even though we had this like whole global pandemic. So Steve, I have a question on again on like technology side of things where oftentimes like Sriram and I, we've basically worked in tech our entire lives, and we're often used to people telling us, oh, tech is just too challenging for non-tech people. It's just really hard to like use it, that kind of thing. But for NBA, it's kind of been an exception where we've seen players specifically being able to like use tech, especially use tech in like really interesting ways. Where for example, over the summer we saw a lot of like calls for social justice and just change, and a lot of it was driven by the players using and leveraging technology in really interesting ways. And you as like the team owner, how do you think about creating a framework where you have to balance the work part of it, where players come in and do what they do every single day to bring your whole self to work kind of principle, where you hear about this in just corporate US as such. How do you think about balancing one versus the other?
Yeah, what I would say is you don't get to be in the NBA by and large if you're not a real professional. Mm-hmm. Meaning you know how to organize your life, you know how to get things done, you know how to organize your time. I mean, it's a lot of hard work to prepare yourself and really be good to play basketball. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about guys who have great capability to do that, and you say, okay, now there's something that we need to speak out on. There are issues of social justice that are very important. You could say you have to balance, and what I would say is you have very capable professional guys who figure out how to do both. They don't say, hey, I got to pick one versus the other. I got to sit here and agonize over whether I'm going to speak out on important issues versus, practice and play basketball. I think our guys in the NBA we're super good at both being loyal and dedicated to their craft, and at the same time getting out there and speaking in their own voices about things that are really important to me, but are, especially really important to our players.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, one last question about basketball. I know we spoke a lot about your LA Clippers, but Aarthi and I, the first ever city we lived in the US for many years was Seattle. And you obviously have very strong ties to Seattle for over decades. When do you think Seattle is going to see a basketball team and doesn't need to feel bad every time they see Kevin Durant?
And don't make any news or anything with this one.
Yeah, you're seeing fun of that. I know nothing. The commissioner talked, Adam Silver talked about the fact that, it's an open consideration at some point to do expansion. I think it's pretty obvious that if expansion was to happen, Seattle would be up at the top of the list. But I certainly have not participated in any in-depth discussions at this point. So I can't tell you timing. What I can tell you is I read the commissioner's remarks at the same time the rest of you did on that topic. I was pleased to see him thinking about it. I'd love Seattle to have a basketball team again. It isn't going to be the Clippers. The Clippers are the LA Clippers. They will stay the LA Clippers. I love having the LA Clippers. We're building a new arena that probably you can call it a new $2 billion, $1.5 billion, whatever it'll be, home for the Clippers in Los Angeles. And I got to say, owning a team in LA or having a team in LA is a competitive advantage. You know, all other things being equal, guys love to be in LA. It's a great place to be. In fact, as it snowed today in Seattle, I was looking wistfully to my trip to LA on Sunday.
Steve, great answer. Even though you never did say
Seattle, no knock on Seattle.
Yeah, great answer. Not telling the Seattle people what to expect, but
yes. But even though you said nothing, I think the thought gets hopes in Seattle up, and they can stop feeling miserable every time they see Durant do something amazing. Okay. All right. I think just to quickly reset. By the way, this room has been overflowing. Everyone is not able to get it. Sorry about that. That overflow rooms. This is the daily good time show that Aarthi and I and a motley crew of people do. And today we have the one and only Steve Ballmer talking to us, and this is blowing up our phones, it's blowing up the internet. And let's keep going. Steven, you're up next.
Yeah. So you were talking about building the new facility, which is a huge community investment, but part of the community goes beyond what you've been doing in LA and part of your work, but to a national level. And so in 2017, you launched, USA Facts, sort of a website about the US. Maybe you could start by just telling people what that is, what you see, how you see it, and as what role you want it to play.
Yeah, URL usafacts.org. Just as it sounds, I encourage people to check it out. But why did we build this thing? I started out trying to understand government in the U.S. the way I like to understand things, which is by the numbers. I wanted to understand who pays taxes, how much do they pay, what does the government really spend money on. I didn't want to just understand the federal government because, take the roads near your house. I can't actually tell you how much gets paid by city, by county, by state, by federal. So you have to look at these things kind of amalgamated. If you really want to understand how much we're spending on education, it's the sum of city, state, school district, federal, et cetera. So I said, I really just want to understand this. Now, I came at this problem because of the work my wife and I do in our philanthropic activities focused in on economic mobility. And if you really want to understand what government is doing to try to help people who are less advantaged, you really need to, as I would say, follow the money. The instinct I had was to go look for the equivalent of a corporate 10K report. Just a simple, straightforward, no bullshit, no hyperbole, no economist bias on the numbers, nothing. Just straightforward government numbers. What's the state of affairs? How much are we raising? How much are we spending? And, oh, by the way, what kind of outcomes? The outcome here is not called profit. The outcome here is called improvements in third grade reading scores. The outcomes here are called improvements in our climate. The outcomes here, they're very different. Lower crime rates, less recidivism. And I found that impossible to find. So what started as a, sort of my own exploration, at some point I said, well, I think we can make this into something that would be interesting. We started out just by writing a report, a 10K, the way a public company would. We wrote an annual report the way a company would. But there was so much more data, there was so much more information. We don't use government numbers. Kind of like a company is supposed to publish its own numbers. We publish government numbers only. And, this has been, unfortunately, a big year of growth for us. We had the first good numbers, for example, on COVID cases by county. We went out, wrote some programs, scraped a bunch of websites because there was no standard data collection for COVID numbers. We do vaccination numbers, but We did a by the numbers, what are the causes of death? Did more people die during the last year than a normal year? How much more? We're not going to give you causality. Causality is for somebody else. We're just going to give you the data. This is what happened. Yes. I think off the top of my head, about 450,000, 500,000 more people died in the country last year than in the preceding year. That's interesting. You could decide that it's all about COVID. You can choose to do further dive. But I think everybody in America deserves the facts about what's going on. The nice thing about numbers is they're nonpartisan. Adjectives can be partisan. Huge increase. Well, that's got bias. You could say no. It was an increase on 62% on a number that started at 1, and 1 is 1% of all the money by the government. So for me, and I think in numbers, I really wanted not only myself but others to be able to understand our country by the numbers, and that's what we've done with usafacts.org.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I think, I love the fact that you just state the numbers, you don't take a stance, you don't, it doesn't mean anything, it's just data. And it's really up to people to observe the data and make their own interpretations of it. I really like that. On the other hand, just contrasting what you've done with USA Facts, we have, a number of other sites. We have these other technologists just creating sites for COVID data. And you just see a tremendous amount of misinformation there. What do you think is really going on? These are people who are tech savvy. What happens here with what do you think is happening here, and how do you attribute this just lack of savviness? And what do you think is this fixable? Just trying to get your sense on the other end of the spectrum where you just have a lot of misinformation and these tech sites floating around.
Well, let me make sure I'm following you, Aarthi. Are we talking about misinformation just about how many people are vaccinated? What are the outcomes? What's going on with COVID rates?
Yeah.
Are you talking about some of?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
About the first one or wild?
The first one.
Okay. So I don't really get it. I mean, honestly, I don't get it. The CDC publishes some pretty good numbers on vaccines. The CDC actually was referring to our numbers when it came to COVID cases. We've been very involved with them. Why? Because, like I said, we were down scrounging around. There's even one county where the only COVID data was on an Excel spreadsheet that the county sheriff kept. So some of it was brute force, some of it was scraping PDF files. But I don't understand. I do understand why there's sort of a rush to find random data points. It's part of the problem of everything political in the country. Politicians like to pick one number and highlight it if it makes their point. Maybe that's what was happening with all these people trying to collect the data. But there were a few sites I thought did a pretty good job. Of course, I like ours best, but I think Johns Hopkins did a pretty good job. And ultimately, the data I want to believe is the data our government uses, in part because I know our government's doing its decision making based on its own data. It's not looking at random third-party sites when it decides, how much vaccine to distribute to various places. But why this rush to misinformation? I think that might have been the sign of the times, or is a sign of the times, as people talk about fake news and all that kind of stuff. I'll give you a quote. Let me give you a quote that I really like, and I won't get it exactly right anymore. Everybody knows the Daniel Patrick Moynihan quote. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. It's just everybody's not entitled to their own facts. I'll go back to one from Madison from the start of the country, just about, where he said something to the effect of a country with a population that doesn't have the information it needs to understand itself, or the ability to go get it, is at best a farce, and at worst something else. I didn't get the quote exactly right, but even back at the founding of the country, there was a clear understanding that people needed information. The Constitution says you got to do a State of the Union, you got to do a census. Madison understood this stuff, and it's a tragedy that people are running around like chickens with their heads cut off these days, and not looking at sort of disciplined, objective numbers the way you would on any business before you invested in it. The craziness of the current investing markets aside.
You don't have a special guest you're going to bring on stage, do you? That'll freak us out again.
No, I don't. But man, between SPACs and what happened with GameStop and Robinhood and the whole phenomenon, I can't say I've spent a lot of time studying it, but it just still points to the kind of randomness. And I think there's a lack of information almost now in the financial markets also, which is part of why things are bopping around wildly a little bit the way they are today.
The amazing part, I mean, that was the site I went to for all my charts and graphs and debates with people and stuff. But the USA Facts is only one arm or branch of the philanthropy work that you and the organization have been doing. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about your general theme of economic mobility and how that is, sort of this main thrust of an umbrella thrust for what you've been doing.
Yeah, with my wife, Connie, who, to be fair, started on this a long time ago, long before I left Microsoft and joined her. But, we focus only in the United States. We started out with the kind of fundamental concept that every kid should have a decent opportunity to achieve whatever they want in their life economically. That everybody knows is not the case in the U.S. today. Some work by the economist Raj Chetty actually shows some historical economic mobility data. At the end of the day, particularly if you look at the numbers for African American boys, for Native Americans, to some degree for Hispanics, the data on upward mobility just doesn't look the way it does especially for white males. People say this is a country in which you can't get ahead. The truth of the matter is you have reasonable economic mobility actually for white males, not bad for white females, and then it sort of declines some from there. It's not okay. That's our fundamental proposition, is that it's not okay. But what do we do? Where should government be investing its resources? Well, philanthropy should be testing things and trying to prove out what might work for government to consider for later funding. There's a lot of not-for-profits in this country that do a lot of good work. They're almost all subscale in some tech way. I mean, at the end of the day, we've been very blessed financially, obviously, and yet, we can't find too many not-for-profits that focus in on kids and families in need. These are people who run preschools. These are people who run after-school programs. These are people who focus in on fighting recidivism for formerly incarcerated people. Just to give an example, some of the stuff that plays into economic mobility, there aren't very many very large not-for-profits. If you find a not-for-profit in that space that has a budget of over 60 or 70 million, that's surprising. Many of them are essentially, the bigger ones are government contractors. They're working off of money that they get paid for example, by Medicaid or state education budgets to run a preschool or provide special services to kids who've been through trauma, whatever the case might be. So scanning, we've been very fortunate. We're looking for big bets to make. What we found now is a series of, I'll call them medium-sized bets on this massive not-for-profits that are out there. We've also found that there's just so many places where policy and law could be improved to help improve economic mobility. I'll give you a small example. We were funders along with others, but we put significant funding into a bill in California on the last election to try to get rid of cash bail. It turns out that there are many poor people who are essentially bankrupted by minor offenses because of cash bail. I can't pay my parking tickets. At some point, that means I have to either go to jail or I have to post bail. I can't afford to post bail, so I go to jail. I go to jail, I lose my job. My family becomes homeless. I mean, you can see the chain reaction of this stuff. And that's a case where we chose to put money in to try to improve policy. The ballot initiative lost. There still is cash bail in the state of California, much to my chagrin. But there's so many places in terms of supporting not-for-profit policy changes, budget allocations in government where a difference can be made. We look at this stuff nationally, but we also take a deep dive in Los Angeles because of the basketball team, Seattle because we live here, and Detroit where I grew up.
Wow,
sorry, that was very long-winded. It's a topic on which I'm very passionate.
That's fantastic.
So we're all just absorbing it, and it's my job to have us shift gears a little bit and get us to spend the remaining time on our old employer at Microsoft, and just to remind people, you left Procter & Gamble, went to business school, and then you dropped out of school so that the company would be eventually run by dropouts, and joined Microsoft as the 30th employee. But one of the things that aside from the being there for a long time that we both have in common is just memes, and the idea that stuff we've done turns into memes. And so I still can't live down this Clippy thing. And it's funny how it was embarrassing and then humiliating and then really disappointing. And then all of a sudden it's kind of cool. And I think what's happening is a lot of the things that have been for you have happened that way. And so one of the ones I wanted to ask about, because I know folks want to hear about, is developers. And of course, I was there.
Steve, you have to say the words. I mean, I've won like a million tweets asking you to say the words.
Yes.
You sound like a guy doing an interrogation. Say the words.
I was there, and at the time, the first thing I want to ask is just explain to people these meetings that we had and what it's like when you have to lead 30, 40, 50,000 salespeople or employees once a year and get them going, and that context gets lost when all you see is the stage.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's I think will always be questions about how you galvanize organizations around mission. That's a hard thing to do. It's hard when you're 20 or 30 people, but at least you can walk into everybody's office and talk about it. When you get to be about 300 or 400 people, you need to have some notion of how to do it, but you can still think you're going to have the regular weekly pizza event on Friday, or of course, Zoom changes all of this at this stage of the game. But when you get larger, you can write memos, you can do lots of communications, but you got to try to make things simple enough for people to get it in their head. Developers. Yeah, people got it. We are only going to exist if we can really get application support behind our platform. We're very successful with that with Windows. I mean, nowadays the issues have changed. The issues where the browser is and mobile platforms and the like, but there was no question the thing that established the PC was the set of work that developers did on top of the platform, including maybe most importantly in some ways the work that Stephen led on Microsoft Office, because that was the showcase app, and then people built around that. But you got to get that message to be really simple. I actually don't even remember when I first said this developers thing, because I probably said it like 1,000 times by the time all was said and done. I thought the first time I said it was actually at an event for developers, trying to show the developers love, but it's possible I did it first internally. The other thing I think which everybody understands in this day and age, that the best way to communicate with your employees is actually to communicate with the press through Twitter, because people are more likely to read, to believe what they read outside than what they hear from their management inside sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's so fascinating to try to play back and try to get people to understand the context of those. I love this company, and like that was all very real at the moment, and it is just what you have to do for so many people. Like, maybe one thing that I think is interesting too is people don't realize how much preparation you put into those kind of events, and like it's not like you were like, here's the 5 slides and you jumped on stage and improvised. Like, everything was fairly thought through. Like, just remind or share, what it was like for you getting geared up for 40,000 salespeople in a stadium.
Yeah. Let me make a general business observation, and then I'll get right to that point, Stephen. But here's the general observation: when a business leader speaks, who cares the most about what they're going to say? The customers? Nah, customers can choose to leave you if they don't think you're doing a good job. So they care. They're invested. They may have bought your product, but they're sort of free agents. Shareholders, most shareholding now is done by mutual funds, and they trade in, they trade out. They're not in the game. Maybe it's the business partners of a company. Microsoft had a partner net or has a partner network that does solutions implementation, et cetera, around its products. They care because they've started to bet their livelihood, but they can move. Who cares the most? Your employees. The employees of a company care the most about the words of the leader. And so whether you're doing a product launch, whether you're doing a sales meeting, you have to make sure that you can instill understanding, confidence, and excitement in your people. And yeah, I spent a lot of time preparing it. Some people, I wasn't scripted. Some of the stuff I did obviously doesn't look scripted, but I would spend time in prep days in advance. And then, if I was going to speak at 5:00 in the afternoon, I was working on what I was going to say basically all day, every minute, over in my head. What's the order? What am I going to say? What are the key points? And hopefully have some visualizations to bring it alive, some humor, some energy. Unfortunately, as maybe you could tell here in the Clubhouse, I do my thinking when I'm talking. So sometimes I'd actually be up on stage and some new thought would come into my head and I'd blurt it out. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's an honest and real thing. But certainly, as Stephen said, not without a lot of preparation. If you give a speech like that falls flat, you have an employee base that wants to hear from you and wants to believe. We went through some tough times. When you're getting sued by your government for antitrust violations, you need to build confidence. When the stock market falls apart after the dot-com bubble or in 2008, you have to build confidence. And, that's part of the role of leadership. And, part of my techniques were some of the speeches you can see online now that, as Stephen says, out of context, they kind of look buffoonish, but they had a value at the time.
Steve, I have to say, those were really so inspiring for us, and not just the ones that people see online, but all the ones internally that we were kind of privileged to see live. Okay, for folks in the audience, I just want to say we're going to go over a few minutes because it's just so fascinating. Twitter and Clubhouse has been blowing up. We want to keep going just for a few extra minutes. Steve, I want to get back to the 90s when it comes to platform evangelism. So Aarthi and I, we actually grew up in the DPE. The DP kind of spotted us as student ambassadors. They brought us into the company, so we kind of have a lot of fond memories of platform evangelism. But could you talk to us about the 90s and how unique the idea of evangelism was and what that meant for Microsoft?
I think Steve, are you muted?
No, he's not muted.
No.
Am I with you guys?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, I think I capped my phone wrong. Anyway, there was no software industry basically when Bill Gates and Paul Allen started Microsoft. I mean, there was a few mainstream software companies, but the notion of a real software industry really only started to emerge in the 80s, actually. Now, in the 80s, there wasn't really a target platform that made much sense. DOS came out, the Apple II was out, people were writing some programs, but I think it's probably fair to say there was no market for the devices, really until Windows came out in the 90s, and particularly Windows 95. Apple did a good job with the Mac, but it wasn't really a mass market product yet at the time. And you needed two things. You needed the notion of a software industry and a mass market device to really gear up this notion that software developers could start out, they could make a business on a high volume device that had some standardization and they could do innovative and great work. So we had to get out there and tell our story. That ties back to the old developers. But at the end of the day, there was a lot more to do. People needed to understand, how can you really build a business? The fact that we were trying to build a software business ourselves at Microsoft, whether that was through Windows Server, the work we were doing in Office, lots of things needed to be pioneered. What does a licensing agreement look like? How do you distribute products at retail? And all of that was important as part of the evangelism. You had to help people understand, not only here's how I build a piece of software, but here's how I can go make money on it. Now, the business models have evolved some, the way you take things to market, the differences between B2B and B2C. The platform has in large measure moved to the cloud. So it looks like Azure, it looks like AWS, it looks like the browser or some of the mobile platforms on the other side. So the platforms have shifted in terms of where and how people are making money. But evangelism is, here's how you build things, and here's how you can make money doing them. I mean, that was some of the genius of the App Store, was a pointer from Apple on how you get your business launched. Not just how you build an app, but how you really launch a business through the use of that App Store. So evangelism means really helping create and shepherd an industry, and hopefully do it in a way that makes the money the platform provider too, whether that is Microsoft with Windows or Azure or AWS or Apple with the iOS devices, et cetera.
So so interesting. So like one of the transition that has been going on now that you led at Microsoft was also this transition to the cloud. And what's fascinating about that, and really the lesson I want to help bring out here, is how big companies can react to change. Because here's one where Microsoft started this in like 2000. I mean, 20 years ago, we had teams trying to figure out how to quote host Office and Exchange and things like that. And customers had no interest at all in it. Like it wasn't for like 5 or 6 more years that you could even get it, considered. And you kept pushing. And it was a very interesting sort of dichotomy to live through, where you're the customer focused, always talking to customers person, yet you're also trying to push us on this technology front that customers were kind of rejecting. And how did you think about that transition at the time? Because it sort of set everything up to happen what's happening now to the company. But it was like 15 years of pain.
Right.
And I should finish. You did this speech. I can't remember what year it was. It was like 2010 or something. You did another one of these speeches with like, we're all in on the cloud. And like the customers and industry analysts were like, what? No.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people have said this, but I'll say it my own way. You got to listen to your customers, but you also have to understand enough about what your customers may need that they don't know about yet. You could blow it. You can give them something they'll never need, and you anticipate they'll need it. But unless you're thinking about what are the pain points that they're expressing, not just how do I patch a pain point, but how do I fundamentally redo it, you're not going to get there. And everybody who's in tech on the call, I think, probably has some sense of that. But some of the bigger bets do take a longer period of time. Microsoft's been always in the fortunate position to have enough financial wherewithal to start early and ride it out. And we did a very good job. The company's taken that to a whole different level since Stephen and I left the place in terms of what's going on with the Office 365 product and Azure. But we had a similar thing happen once earlier. We actually thought PCs and PC servers were going to power enterprises. And there was a time that no customer accepted that. And yet, if you thought about the agility that a on-prem server would bring, scaled up versus mainframes, it took us years to establish that was a credible enterprise proposition. Similarly, and it took literally, I was told 10 or 15 years by customers, 15 years at least, Microsoft's never going to be right for the enterprise. Okay, well, now Microsoft seems to be known as an enterprise company. Same thing on the cloud. It was clear that you could reduce complexity, you could help standardize things, you could take out labor costs, you could attack new workloads if we could get things to the cloud. We did a good job, really good job on that. The company did a great job getting out front of that. on Office. Azure, I wish we probably started a year or so, 2 years earlier. And we started actually with platform as a service instead of infrastructure as a service. Probably would do that a little bit differently. Cost us a little bit of time in the battle, the eventual battle, if you will, with AWS. But you see it all coming to fruition. Because it was a set of pain points that may not have been acknowledged as that, but then you stay patient with it. I mean, when I think about the things where we wanted to succeed but didn't succeed, it generally has to do with we didn't really have a model of what necessarily we should do that was right up front. We had to build, if we're going to be in the phone business, we should have built phones earlier. That was wrong. We didn't have the model right. The model of doing something that's a back end, a productivity, and a front end thing, essentially all of those things have gotten transformed to the cloud at this stage. There's no new propositions, but there are new ways to add value around those.
Yeah, I think that's great because I'm thinking about it in the context of how do you think about all of this in the context of current technology companies, especially the big super successful ones. How do they think about how do you think they should think about navigating this? You can either develop new products or have a good model around that, or you keep existing customers happy, and there are millions of them. So, what trade-offs do you think you make, and at what point, keeping an existing customer happy, when does that become more of a burden? How do you think about this?
Well, I mean, look, if you're a big company, you sort of have to avoid getting caught in that trap. You just do. It doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean, Steve and I, many conversations, do you start a parallel team to essentially do the same thing in a different way? Do you have a team that's responsible for building next week's product, build the product for 3 years from now? Those are complicated things. But if you don't do them, you're going to stop being a big company. If you view this as a question of or instead of and, then you just have to figure out the best way for and. And there are companies who've navigated that well. Apple has navigated that well. They continue to push their products forward, and to some degree, I won't say abandon their customers because they don't do that, but you either take big leaps with them or you're not going to be as happy as they would have you be. And I think that has been a wise decision. Instead of patching small pain points, they say move forward with us in big increments. Okay, I get that. I believe in that. It certainly worked super well. So I think there are a lot of ways to get there. For big companies, the things that are most likely to trip you up is kind of how you see yourself. If Microsoft had not chosen to see itself as a cloud company, Microsoft wouldn't exist in the same form that it does today. IBM did not, in the old days, choose to see itself in certain ways. Amazon has chosen to see itself as a full-service delivery company. It could have viewed itself just as a retailer, but the incredible effort and energy they put into that back-end distribution system is amazing. And, were they supposed to, compete with UPS effectively? Well, no. They said, look, we're going to continue to see ourselves in different ways. And, if I look back and I say, if you get preconceived notions about what your company does and those get too deeply embedded in the culture and they need to change, that's where you get, and I think you can get into bad trouble. And the great companies don't get afflicted by that. But if you look historically, the companies that were big in the computer industry when I started are no longer big in the computer industry. There are companies that have started or have really come into fruition since I started in the business in 1980. They came, they thrived, and now they don't look as important as they did. I mean, they're great companies. Oracle's a great company, and it came from nothing. Well, I was there, it rose in. It's this big database provider. And yet it's stagnated relative to the kinds of things that have happened at Amazon and Microsoft and the move to the cloud. And you can see it in the evolution of market cap. And I'm not taking a shot at Oracle. That's not really my point. And then you see companies that have been more dynamic. And those are the companies that, either started with new propositions like Facebook that have developed, or companies that have evolved like Apple, like Amazon, like Microsoft. And that's where you get the three largest market cap companies in the world.
Steve, that was amazing. I know we're way past the hour. I want to wrap with one final question. I know this is something which is close to your heart. Could you talk to us about the work that you do with code.org and why that's so important for you?
Well, code.org, for those of you that don't know, is a organization, not for profit, that promotes the learning of computer science, the study of and development of competence in computer science in kids pre-college, high school, and even to some degree down younger. I've always thought that was a great thing, although after it became obvious, at least to me, that computer science was going to get taught in high schools, I went to the founder, a friend of mine. I've known him since the 90s when he started at Microsoft, named Aarthi. I said, come on, Aarthi, nobody needs to work hard anymore to get people interested in computer science in high school. And he had a good comeback in the context of focus on economic mobility. He said, yeah, we might get enough engineers in our countries coming out now to work at likes of Amazon and Microsoft and Apple, but we need to make sure we're getting the kids who are less fortunate, for whom this is a path to economic mobility. That's what code.org has to focus in on now, not the head of the tail that are going to get into computer science anyway. And that was a compelling proposition. We have a grant out now with code.org where Hadi's a very business-oriented, accountability-oriented guy. And essentially, the size of our grant to his organization is directly proportionate to the number of low-income Black and brown kids who take AP Computer Science and who pass AP Computer Science. And literally, we pay them grant dollars. We donate proportionate to their ability to help people get over the goal line, because it is consistent with our mission. And so much of the economic opportunity in the country is going to come from people who either develop software, implement software, a variety of different things in tech. And so we have to spark the interest in the computer field, and we've got to equip people with tools. If you go to college today and you know nothing about programming, it's really hard to catch up and really put yourself in a position to do well. And I think it's an incredible proposition. It's a great organization. They have some ways to scale up, to drive into more schools. It's one of the more scalable not-for-profits, frankly, that we support, which is pretty exciting. And if I was just to cap it off on this very long answer, one of the great fun days I had, my wife and I went to visit a high school in East Los Angeles. Not obviously a less advanced high school. Let me put it that way. We visited a couple classrooms, and this one woman was teaching computer science, or essentially some programming. And she started off by saying, there's this great stuff from this thing called code.org that we use to teach our kids. And I got to say, I got a little chuckle, a little pride in Hadi. I was kind of his mentor when he started at Microsoft, and quite a thrill out of that. It's important stuff, and I'm excited about what they do.
That's amazing, Steve. Also inspiring. Aarthi and I know Hadi and his brother really well. I think what all of you are doing is just really, really inspiring. Before I wrap, I would ask you, what do you think of Clubhouse?
This is kind of fun. I have no idea what kind of reaction. Of course, you can't see faces. You can't read a crowd. It's not like one of those big sales meetings we were talking about earlier. But I've had a lot of fun. Steven said one of the great things about Clubhouse is, you don't have to be in front of the computer. You could be on your phone. You could be relaxed. Well, I've been in a hot tub during our whole Clubhouse session, and I found it amazing because I don't know if you can hear the water splashing, but I took it up on it, and I got to say, it's a pretty good way to do a discussion.
Oh my God! I would say, Steve. I mean, you can open up your phone and look at Twitter when we're done. It's been blowing up. People love this. I just want to wrap. I want to say. First of all, to everyone who tuned in, this room was max capacity. Thank you for listening. Thank you to all the overflow rooms. Thank you to the dozens and dozens of tweets. Everything from shouting developers to questions for Steve to just loving the energy and authenticity he brings, and all the Clippers fan. I see a lot of you also. To all of our crew, obviously Aarthi and Gary, and definitely Steven, who helped put this together, and for all the amazing Microsoft stories. But most of all, Steve, thank you so much. You've been such a huge influence on our lives and careers. Even if you don't remember us, and this was amazing. So thank you so much for doing this tonight with us.
Thanks. I got one commercial announcement at the end. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Go, Clip!
Love it. Okay, Steve, I have a surprise for you.
Oh, we spent a lot of time on this music, Steve, so be prepared.
Yeah. Sorry, I have a surprise for you, Steve. I'm going to take a minute to set this up. Okay, so we have a tradition where we pick a song for every episode, depending on the guest and depending on the theme. And for this song, I want to go back to 2007 or 2006. And Aarthi and I had just moved to the United States because Microsoft had moved us over. And every year, Microsoft hosts a big company meeting in this large baseball field. And every Microsoft employee will know what I'm talking about. And you go there and you're sitting up in the rafters. And Aarthi and I, we were like halfway around the world from home. We were new, we were in our early 20s. We didn't have a lot of money. It was cold. We were freezing our asses off. And then at the end of every Microsoft company meeting, the main event is the music hits. And I don't know what to expect, but you get this really loud, really energetic Steve who bounces out. And I have to say, and the energy and the passion he exuded, it just made it feel like everything was going to be all right. It made it feel like you were a part of something bigger than yourself, that you were part of something which was going to make an impact on the world. And honestly, for the next few weeks, few months, we would run through walls. And for every Microsoft who was there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And for people who read it, you have to imagine it's just a special moment. I still remember Steve trying to drink honey because he's lost his voice in the middle of his speech, and then getting back into it. And so, Steve, the song I remember from that year is what we're going to play next. Gary, can you play Eye of the Tiger?
Such a Steve song. Oh.
This is amazing.
Steve, I'm doing the little eye gesture you do. I'm watching you.
Everyone, Steven and Steve B, thank you so much. This was amazing. This was iconic. Thank you so much. We're going to take a break tomorrow day after and be back on Sunday. Steve, thank you so much. This is amazing. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.